those of you who don't know me, I'm Jim Ludis. I am Vice President for Strategic Initiatives here at the University and Executive Director of the Pulse Center. And it's my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you to this conversation tonight. Teresa hinted at it, but no, that's not your tinnitus acting up. There is some alarm in one of these floors that is going, the security is trying to address it. So we appreciate your indulgence with this modern interference in our evening. I thought it was just me when I walked in, but it's not. We've got a wonderful program and a wonderful conversation planned for tonight. When it is all done, the author will be signing books in the State Dining Room, which is directly behind us. So we hope that when the conversation is over, you will be able to stay, enjoy an adult beverage or two, and get a chance to meet the author in person and have her sign your books. Books are also, I believe, for sale back there as well, so we hope you'll stay. To get us started tonight, though, we have looking for Silver Moon. There she is. We're going to kick off tonight with a land recognition from Silver Moon LaRose, who's the Assistant Director of the Tamaulipas Museum here at Rhode Island. Silver Moon.
Asco Pasadunas, Natasui Silver Moon LaRose, Nina Hagansik, Hanayente, Kanupiam, Aki, Hagansik, where am I? Sorry. Oh my goodness. This has been a very long day. A very good day. I've got a lot of little children this morning, and now my brain is done. But thank you for having us today. Stories are not a written record. They are a physical embodiment of thoughts and memories, feelings and emotions, hopes and dreams. Stories are alive. A land acknowledgement is a story that acknowledges the history of a place, the original caretakers of that place, what has happened, what is still going on. We are telling the story of a living people and their survivance, despite colonization, despite genocide, despite enslavement, despite removal and displacement, despite assimilation attempts. The indigenous people of Rhode Island are still here. A land acknowledgement is a story. It is the beginning of a story that is still being written. A countermeasure to the erasure of indigenous people. This is your call to action in the story. A story I am now passing on to you to continue. What will happen next? What will be done? How do you want this story to end? That is up to you. Stories are sacred medicine. That's what Angeline Boulley wrote in my book today when she so graciously signed it. Stories are sacred, limitless and timeless. Stories are medicine. They heal us. They feed the mind and touch the heart. They connect to the soul. If stories are sacred medicine, then authors are healers. That is how I see you, Angeline. Your book is medicine and you are a healer. Representation matters. To open a book and see yourself on page and feel connected and included, understood, the main character. Representation shows us that our stories have worth, that we are worth. And when we are able to share those stories with others, it opens up dialogue, fosters understanding, it builds allies and creates change. Angeline, you are truly an auntie, in all the indigenous sense of that word. Like Donis's aunt, Teddy Firekeeper, aunties are strong. They are protectors and promoters, enforcers. We love our aunties. Seeing you here, a strong indigenous woman, glowing in all of your literary success, protecting our stories, promoting our voices, enforcing our teachings. Representation matters. You are the encouragement that we need to see to show us that our dreams are attainable, that there is a need and a place for our stories in this world. I just want to say thank you to Batmiana Wayam. Thank you with all my heart to Miigwech. Thank you for giving us the gift of your story.
Thank you, Silvermoon. One of the great joys of my time here at Salve has been to get to know Kate Lentz and to work with the Rhode Island Center for the Book. Several years ago, we were blessed, really, to have them come and be in residence at the Pell Center. I have such tremendous respect for this organization, for the work you do across the state. It is just a joy to be a part of your community and to be able to share some of that with you here tonight. But to offer a word of introduction and thanks from the board of the Rhode Island Center for the Book, it's my pleasure to bring to the microphone Megan Lenigan, the chair of the board.
Hi, thank you, Jim. And thank you, Salve Regina University, for hosting us. The Pell Center for International Relations and Public Policy at Salve Regina University has been home to the Rhode Island Center for the Book since 2019. And we are grateful and honored to be a part of your work, helping to further Senator Claiborne Pell's legacy in supporting and spreading the humanities in education. I am Megan Lenigan. I am the lower school librarian at Lincoln School in Providence. I am director of the Rhode Island Festival of Children's Books and Authors, and I am the chair of the Rhode Island Center for the Book, which is why I'm here tonight. Response to Firekeeper's Daughter, the 2022 Reading Across Rhode Island selection, has been overwhelming in the best way. Hundreds of high schools, libraries, senior centers, churches, community centers, and book groups around the state have been reading and discussing the book, or participating in one of the many programs run over the last few weeks. To all of the teachers and librarians that are in our audience, thank you. Thank you for going above and beyond the regular curriculum by introducing and including this book to your students. If your class, library, or reading group received a set of Firekeeper's Daughter, it's because of the generous support of our sponsors. Barrington Books, Barton Gilman, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Books on the Square, Charter Books, Fidelity Investments, Nellie Mae Education Foundation, Nugent Capital, Rhode Island PBS, Rhode Island Library Association, Rhode Island Office of Library and Information Services, Savoy Bookshop and Cafe, and the Tomaquag Museum. And a special thanks to our Center for the Book donors. Many of you who are here tonight, your contributions support all our tremendous programming. And if you haven't yet donated, there is still time. You can donate the cost of a book or set of books to a classroom or library by visiting the Center for the Book table tonight. The scale and impact of this year's Reading Across Rhode Island program, thousands of books delivered to libraries and classrooms across the state, virtual programs, dramatic presentations, author events, poetry readings, podcasts, and webinars would not have been possible without the Reading Across Rhode Island Committee and countless volunteers who helped this program reach so many diverse communities across our state. Special thanks to Amy Vanderweel, Reading Across Rhode Island Chair, and to the selection committee tasked with choosing the book. It takes months for them to find the latest and greatest book that will spark interest and speak to readers across Rhode Island. And a big shout out to Maureen Nagel, Chair of the Reading Across Rhode Island Education Committee, for developing a Rhode Island curriculum and resource guide for the book and supporting teachers with an Evening for Educators series. In partnership with Rhode Island PBS and the National Education Association of Rhode Island, the series just won a National Public Media Award, and Maureen was also selected to present a workshop about reading across Rhode Island at the National Council of English Teachers annual conference. And thanks to Emily Gorman, Chair of Reading Across Rhode Island Programming Committee, for organizing a staggering amount of programs and activities with this year's book. And of course, I need to recognize fearless leader Kate Lentz. Your vision and passion for bringing the Rhode Island community together. The reading has introduced us, the readers, to many characters, ideas, and important issues. And for that, we thank you. And thank you, Angeline Boulley. Oh, I can't think of a more perfect book to mark Reading Across Rhode Island's 20th anniversary. Through the beautiful words in The Firekeeper's Daughter, you brought very real issues to the forefront for conversation and reflection. This has inspired many to share their stories and to build interconnectedness across our own diversity and generational and geographic territories. Great stories like Firekeeper's Daughter help us step outside of ourselves, but more importantly, help us to activate our imaginations to see the world through another's eyes, while also helping us understand our own experience. We are grateful to you.
All right, enough speechifying. Let's get to this here. I'm going to ask Angeline to join me up on stage. I would give you an introduction, but I suspect that everybody knows who this wonderful lady is. Angeline Boulley. All right, you guys still hear us? So, Angeline, first of all, welcome. It's a joy to be with you tonight. What is an event like this where your book is read by such a concentrated audience across the state mean for you as an author?
It's beyond anything that I dreamt of. I dream big, but I never could have imagined the experience that I've had and being here and just all the different age ranges and segments of the population that have just taken to the story and the characters. It's beyond anything I really could have dreamt of.
Well, this was something that Kate and I had talked about actually previously, was that the book itself has characters who are representational of multiple different generations. How much of that is central to the storytelling that you were trying to pass on, and how much of that is just sort of the coincidence of artistic creation and you needed that kind of character?
I think it's hard to tell a story that's rooted in a tribal community and not have elders in it. And what I wanted to do was to show elders as an integral part of the story and not just window dressing. And so my experiences working for my own tribe and meeting with our elders, I would go to lunch with them at least once a week in our elder center. So those conversations and laughter and just the different characters I would encounter, I was really pleased to be able to incorporate them into a story like this.
But so one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, and I tend to ask this of fiction authors in particular, how much, so they say write what you know, how much of this is drawn from experiences that you've had?
I would say there's a good amount that's, comes from my life experience. I'm similar to Jonas in that, we're both light-skinned Ojibwe women who didn't live on the reservation, but always had a connection, family, and would be on the reservation a lot. My father's Ojibwe, my mother's not native, and I too had a non-native grandmother who did not care for Native Americans at all. And I remember being confounded by why do you love me if you don't like this part of me? I just couldn't fathom that. So just, those are the things that really are similar with Donis. I've always been enrolled in my tribe, so that's where we're different. I've never played hockey a day. I am definitely not good in chemistry or math.
I think I read somewhere that when you were in high school, somebody tried to set you up with someone who turned out to be an undercover narcotics investigator.
Yes.
So that part was a little autobiographical.
Yeah, yes, that was the spark for the story. It was just a best friend who went to a different high school just across the state border and told me about a new boy senior year. She was looking out for me. Thought he was just my type and, dateless and intrigued over here. I would ask questions about him. I ended up never meeting him because he didn't play sports, and that was like, and then I also hung out with the really hardcore partiers in their school. So, and then it was towards the end of the school year that my friends said there had been a huge drug bust, and it turned out that the new guy had been an undercover cop. And this was right before 21 Jump Street, the original series. So I didn't know any, that was before that entered into anyone's understanding. So just the thought that this young-looking law enforcement officer, narcotics officer, could pose as a high school student, I thought that was so bizarre.
So when you decided to write, was your intention always to write a crime story? Because I'm going to be honest with you, I'm reading this book, and if you know me, you know that I like a certain amount of schmaltz, and I was settling in for a really cute little romance, and then
Yeah.
Was your intention all along to write a crime story?
I think originally it was this mystery thriller crime story. That was kind of the external plot, but after 10 years of working on the story and research and what I really wanted to do, I figured out that the core of the story was Daunis and her connection with family and community. The story was really about a young person claiming their Indigenous identity and finding their place in the world. And it was just dressed up like this mystery thriller.
Yeah. What, so 10 years.
10 years.
What is that process like? I mean, that seems daunting in the best of circumstances, but how do you start? How do you decide, okay, I'm ready to write a book now? I mean, what's that process like?
Well, honestly, I was in my mid-40s, and I think I went through a midlife crisis, honestly. It just realizing at 44 that, best case scenario, I was at the midway point of my life, and if I hadn't accomplished the things I always said I was going to do, I, better get to it. So, that was really the impetus to just start writing this story that had been on my mind for, decades at that point. And I just started by getting up early one day, about an hour before my kids got up for school, and I had my cup of coffee and sat at the family computer and just started writing. And it was such a peaceful, creative time, and I enjoyed it so much that I started getting up an hour and a half early. And then, through the 10 years, a lot happened. I went through a divorce, my kids graduated from high school, I relocated to Washington, D.C., and really towards that final draft, I was getting up at 4:30 in the morning and writing for 3 hours before I would commute into D.C. for my day job.
Wow. Is there a process of self-discovery that goes along with the creation?
Sure, definitely. My younger sister, Sarah, passed away in a car accident, and she was 29, and I was 31, and it was so, I couldn't fathom that someone so vibrant and beautiful and healthy and so much going on in her life could be here one day and gone the next. And so I do believe that a lot of the story about grief and loss and healing and continuing on in the face of unimaginable tragedy, that definitely was drawing upon my own experience. And when my parents are still alive, they're with us, and 81 years old, both of them. And they're still vibrant and healthy, but they each complain about the other, like slowing down memory issues. But they tell me the same story over and over, about each other. So I've kind of deduced that they're declining at about the same rate. But when they read the book, they really got a kick out of one characteristic of Lily, Jonas's best friend, is that she's a horrible parallel parker. And my sister literally would front in, tap the bumper in front of her, reverse, tap the bumper behind her, and then settle in somewhere in the middle. And when my parents read that, they just, they were happy. They were happy to see that quirky part of my sister preserved in a story about a girl who was here one day and gone the next.
Have you always been a storyteller?
I think so.
Yeah. Like, when did you realize that you had this superpower?
I think it was when I looked at all of the grant writing that I had done and realized that because I hadn't written any books or any stories before that, but realizing that every grant that I wrote was a short story in 40 pages or less plus attachments, that I really was like writing a compelling narrative about my community and the issue that we wanted to address. And I think that gave me confidence that even though my training as a writer was so different from any other fiction author I had ever read about, it didn't mean that my experience was any less valid than someone who, had an MFA and, had a couple of starter novels behind them. Like, I could write well and realize that I was good at telling a story.
I think you can tell by the number of people in this room who have applied for grants by the laugh.
Yes.
Do you, so I should note that we do have microphones available. I could talk to Angeline all night tonight, but we do want this to be a little bit more of a conversation. So if you've got questions, just come up to the microphone. We'll recognize you and be happy to take your questions. So I think you said earlier that you weren't a great student in chemistry and science, but Donis is.
Yeah.
How do you master what you need to master to be able to present that character as smart as she is?
Yeah. A lot of research and writing and showing chapters to people who are good in the things that I'm not and making sure that I got it right. And that included, for never playing hockey and just watching my kids play hockey, showing those chapters to a friend of mine who's always a woman who's always played hockey growing up, and just making sure I got it right.
This is craft. This is really working at the craft.
Yes.
Do you, so I'm just going to cut right to the chase here. This is a question I never expected to ask, particularly in this setting, but did you teach us how to cook meth?
I was very deliberate in what I shared and what I left off the page. I did learn how to make meth from the state police.
That was going to be my next question.
Yes, yes. So there's a professor at Lake State University who was a former state trooper, had a lot of contacts at the state police academy, and we were on some committee for the city of Sault Ste. Marie, and we're at dinner with a group of people, and I mentioned over the 10 years, like, I'm writing a book, and most people are like, oh, that's nice. It's like, really, what's it about? And as soon as I said it was a drug investigation on a tribal reservation, he was all interested in like the criminal aspect of it, and he was like, wow, that would be cool. That would be cool if this happened, And then he got a hold of me later and said, there's a workshop coming up in Lansing at the academy, and if you're interested, I think I could get you into it. And it was different methods of meth production and how to identify clandestine meth labs. So I took a vacation day, I got up in the morning and drove to dancing, and I was the only non-law enforcement person in the class.
That's a little bit similar to the course that Donis had to take.
Yeah, yes.
So, all right, so there's science, there's tradition, there are all of these things that you present. But you mentioned that this is in a lot of ways a reflection on identity. You seamlessly integrate the Ojibwe language into the text. I wonder if you could talk us through a little bit about, first, the process that you use to do that, because it's not like you sort of gave us a dictionary to work from.
Right.
But also, does this operate on a metaphorical level as well? So I'm going to stop talking. Those are my questions.
Okay. So I chose to write the story in first person, point of view, present tense, because I wanted the reader to be there inside Donis's head as it's happening. And I did that for a number of reasons, one of which is to drive home the point that we Indigenous people are still here, living modern, dynamic lives. And so the simple thing of putting the story in present tense, is one way of doing it. And so, with Donis, her upbringing, her Aunt Teddy has always made sure that her Ojibwe language and culture and teachings have always been a part of Donis's life. That's just how she views the world. And so her story, you're inside her head, so of course there's going to be Ojibwe words kind of peppered in wherever. And I pushed back with my publisher and purposely did not want a glossary. I thought if I did a good job as the writer, that the reader would be able to glean the meaning and context. But I felt like if I included a glossary, I was centering it in a non-native gaze, and I really felt like this was an opportunity to tell a story that was purely Anishinaabe story and centered in that gaze. And I trusted the reader that if they were curious about it, they could look it up on their own. But I didn't want to provide a glossary.
Was there a method to deciding which words you would use from Ojibwe? So when she's reflecting on a thought or she's talking to one of her friends and an Ojibwe word is used. Was there a process for you to decide when would she use Ojibwe and when she would not?
I relied on a lot of my community experience and the words that teens in my community and in the schools I've worked in, how they include Ojibwe language in their everyday conversation. So I just wanted to show that.
I believe my tinnitus is not ringing. Thank you. Again, folks, if you've got questions, please feel free to approach the microphone. We'll be happy to have you. Here we go. Let's get the show started.
Hi, thanks so much for being here, Angeline. We're so glad to have you. I feel like I've been asked this question by a lot of people. Why did you set it in the time period that you set it? Why early 2000s?
I set it in 2004, 2005 for 3 different reasons. One is that that's when meth was exploding across the country. It wasn't just in Indian reservations, it was all over. And 2, in Michigan, that's when there were 7 tribes that were doing gaming in Michigan, and there were a few tribes that had a great location, and those tribes had incredible profits during that time, and I liked that kind of clash of economic power changing the dynamics in a community, and then this meth being there too. And then third is that I needed GPS technology to be present, but not precise as it is today, and phones to be, not have that GPS tracking capability. Otherwise, it would have been very easy to find Donis and Jamie.
Sir.
Hi. I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about some of the research. Like, what does it look like? What does your research look like when you write a book like this?
My internet browser history is scary. Like making meth, and signs you might be living next to a meth lab. But also, when I lived in Washington, D.C., a friend of mine connected me with Walt Lamar, who is Native, and he is a retired FBI agent. And so we met and developed trust, and then I could talk to him about, investigations, FBI investigations, and then he put me in contact with someone who was a retired IRS agent. I learned about money laundering, just these personal connection with subject matter experts. There's that. And then there's also, so this is an odd story, but so my oldest boy played hockey. He still does. And one time I was waiting for him to get done with practice, and I was like, would a body fit in a trunk? So I went out to our car, and I popped the trunk, and I climbed in. And I'm a larger person, so I'm like, okay, so it is possible for like a grown man to fit in a trunk if you had him like this and this and this. And then tribal police picked that moment to like drive. Stopped and asked if everything was okay, and I said, I'm writing. I'm a writer. I'm writing a story. This is research. So yeah, I read books. I listened to podcasts. The one thing I did not do, I did not watch Breaking Bad. And that was because I wanted to make sure that any information I gathered was different than that, because I wanted to make sure that my source was not watching every season of Breaking Bad. I wanted to make sure that it was rooted somewhere else.
And did you go to Sugar Island, and did you do oral history?
So Sugar Island is a small island in between Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. And it's we have family property there. That's where we would spend summers when I was a kid. And I own the family property now. And it's where my dad was born, so it's a special place. And when I lived in Sault Ste. Marie, I just loved going over to Sugar Island and just, walking the property. It's heavily wooded, and taking that ferry over, it's just, there's such a feeling about returning to something that's solid and timeless.
Thank you.
The Sugar Island Powwow is held the third weekend in July of every year. And so last year, my agent and editor flew from New York and went to the powwow with me. And my dad was there. My dad and his cousin, they go a week ahead of time, and they camp out, they stake out their corner of the powwow ground so that nobody else can set up their spot. And the whole weekend, all that they do is cook and eat and laugh and feed people and tell stories. And my agent and editor, they had never been to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. They'd never been to a powwow. And my dad is one of those people who's like, ask me anything, I'll tell you everything I know, and what I don't know, I'll make up. Yeah, they loved him. And then I drove them around Sault Ste. Marie and Sugar Island the Friday before the powwow, and I was like, this is the parking lot where Donis punches Jamie, and this is where this happened. And then when we were on the Sugar Island ferry, we're like, this is where this happened, and then this, and running around the ferry. So, very much my research was rooted right there.
Did you keep, so I know some other authors who will keep notes of devices that will maybe someday be useful in some work, what they're working on now or some book down the road. Do you have a file like that?
I have many files, and I've moved so many times over the course of this. I'm still coming across slips of paper where I have this idea and I'm like, oh, that's right, I meant to put this in the book. So for book 2, I have one of those moleskin books that I carry with me everywhere, and I've been determined that all of my research, all of my notes are going to be in one place so that I don't find scraps of paper 10 years from now saying, you meant to do this great thing in the story. And
We're going to come to you in just a second, but I have to follow up on this. The next book.
yes. So, okay, here's the story about book 2. It was after I got my agent, so it was like late spring of 2019, early summer of 2019. I had been working on this story for 10 years of writing and revising, a couple more decades of planning and creating. And I thought, okay, the train is leaving the station. This is going to happen. And I thought, what next? And I thought, if all I've got in me, if I'm a one-hit wonder, I'm satisfied because I made my book epic and I'm really happy with it. But then I was living in Washington, D.C., and I was out for a walk one Sunday, and I'm walking around, and when I would go for my Sunday walk, I would have my iPhone with me, and then I would have my driver's license and a credit card tucked into the high pocket. And I'm walking around, and all of a sudden this voice popped into my head, and this person said, I stole everything they think I did, and even stuff they don't know about yet. And I was like, wait, who is this? And so I ran to the nearest business, and it was this imported cheese deli bar restaurant thing. So I ran up to the bar, and I said, I need a piece of paper and a pen and a Chardonnay. I sat there all afternoon, writing this stream of consciousness of this young woman sitting in this police station waiting for her parents to come get her and thinking, how did it come to this? And that was the day I knew I had more than one story. And so book 2, if book 1 was Indigenous Nancy Drew meets 21 Jump Street, you always have to have your elevator pitch. Book 2 is Indigenous Lara Croft, but instead of raiding tombs, the main character is a 16-year-old girl who is raiding museums to bring our ancestors and sacred items back to Sugar Island.
Wow. When do we expect this?
This time next year.
All right.
So, and the title and cover reveal will happen next month.
We've got a question here.
First, I just want to say it was such a joy to have a Rhode Island book based in Michigan. I went to Michigan, my daughter went to Michigan, is at Michigan, so it was super fun to have those references because people from Rhode Island don't necessarily spend time anywhere in northern Michigan. It's so beautiful. So thank you for letting us all in on that secret, beautiful part of the country. But my question is about how hard it was for you as a first-time author to get published and what that process looked like.
Okay, whenever an author talks about their path to publication, they always preface it by saying, your mileage may vary, because every author's experience is so different, and mine is definitely the outlier. So my experience was the opposite of hurry up and wait. So it took a very long time for me to go from idea to drafting the story, working on the story, but like a roller coaster, like that first big hill. But once I got there, once I had that draft that I knew could get published, it took off and it's not ended. That ride has not ended yet. I had an agent within 2 weeks. And there was a 12-bidder auction 2 weeks after my book went on submission. And then 2 weeks after that, I sold the film rights and another 7-figure deal to the Obamas for a series on Netflix.
on Netflix with Higher Ground, Obama's production company. Where can you give us an update on where production stands?
I wouldn't look for anything until like the second half of next year. If I thought publishing was a long game, book adaptations for the screen, that's an even longer, situation. We have a head writer, her name is Winona Wilms, and she's a screenwriter, and she is a member of the Red Cliff Band of Ojibwe in Wisconsin. And so I'm really glad that an Indigenous woman is heading up the writing on the series.
In fact, you told in an interview I read with Rolling Stone, you said that you emphasized that this was an important part of why you were so happy to be with Higher Ground. That putting Indigenous talent, not just in front of the camera, but also behind the camera in the production was so important. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. I really do feel strongly about representation, and in the books that we read, in the movies that we watch, in the television, everything. I think if there are stories that are coming from our communities, they're best told. A writer is welcome to write anything that they want. But when it comes time to get a publishing deal, I really feel like it's the authors that are representing those communities that should get those publishing deals. And so there were about 8 production companies and different networks that were interested in acquiring my book. Some wanted it for a feature film and some wanted it for a series. And I would tell all of them the same thing on those calls. I would say, representation is my core value, wanting native creative talent, not just in front of the camera, but behind it, in the writer's room, every level of production. And there was a guy from some production company who was like, hey, are there any native screenwriters? And I just thought, I'm not going to do business with this person. I'm not going to do Indians 101 with someone. And of course there are native screenwriters. And the fact that he didn't know that was the first sign that that's not someone I want to do business with. Because when you're an author and you do a deal for adapting your book, you give up so much control. And so you have to trust the business partners that you have. And when I had the conference call with the executives from Higher Ground, their reaction to that, my statement about representation, was a complete 180. And they were like, absolutely, these are the networks of screenwriters that we're tuned into. These are some of the people that we're looking at. And if you know of anyone, please let us know. Like, it was very much, they got the project and they understood how important the representation was.
Question?
I've been thinking a lot about the healing in this book, especially in the context of what has happened this week in our nation. And I was wondering if you had any advice for a teen librarian who's going to be hosting a teen book club with this book this summer. If you had any advice that I could share with teens who might be struggling with everything going on.
I think using that Kinsey ceremony, so I made a very conscious decision that I was not going to include an actual ceremony in the book because it's not my place to share those ceremonies outside of that ceremony. But I do believe in the healing power of our ceremonies, so I invented one, the Pansy ceremony, which happens towards the end of the book, because I did want to show how a community, how we can use our culture, our traditions to heal. And so I would maybe suggest focusing on that scene and then talking to students about what are the ways in which their family does, because ceremony, it can be very simple, like Dawn is putting tobacco, by that tree every morning and saying a little prayer and asking for strength in a certain, way. Ceremony doesn't have to be this big thing. It can be a very personal and private thing. But talking to students about the ways in which maybe they find comfort, in nature or connecting with some, a higher power, or I think that's, it can be a great place for starting a conversation.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
I remember reading somewhere, this might be Stephen King advice on that, take it for what it's worth, but I think that I read an interview where he said, craft characters that people will love, and then do terrible things to them.
Pretty much.
That's kind of what you did. Is that good advice for writers?
That's pretty good advice. You know, write characters that are believable, that, you know, you feel like, you know, if you're in the Upper Peninsula, if you're in Sault Ste. Marie or on Sugar Island, how would Donis be so real that people swear that she just left the room, you know, or that she's going to be showing up any minute now, like have her be such a real presence. So yeah, I do agree with that.
You mentioned that you studiously avoided Breaking Bad, but are there other authors, other storytellers that you standing on their shoulders in telling this story? People that you took inspiration from?
There's an author that I read when I was a much younger person, a younger woman, and it was The Last Time They Met by Anita Shreve. And that was the first time I think I read a book that was in present tense, and it was told backwards. So this man and woman who've had this connection, they're meeting and they're in their, you know, 30s or early 40s. And then the next section of the book is them in their late 20s, I think. And then the last section of the book is them as 17-year-old high school seniors. And the revelations that happen, it's devastating. And I was thinking about how that author crafted that story. And if she had told a purely linear timeline, it wouldn't have been the same story. It wouldn't have had that impact. And so it taught me that it's not just the story you tell, it's how you tell it and the artistic and crafted choices that you make that can elevate the story. I could have handed my outline to a dozen writers. No one could have told the story the way that I told it. And so just really seeing the artistry that an author can do with the story. Best audiobook I've ever read is Sadie by Courtney Summers, and that follows a young woman who is on the search for the man who killed her 13-year-old sister, and she's trying to hunt him down. The story's going along, and it's, you know, narrated by Sadie, and then all of a sudden there's this podcast episode in the middle of it, and it's a podcast called The Girls, and it's looking into these two sisters and what happened to them. And then you realize, wait, they're talking about Sadie. Sadie's one of these girls that has gone missing. And then it flips back to Sadie's story. And just the way, I think that Courtney Summers did something in how she told that story. It elevated what is possible for an audiobook. And so it's my favorite audiobook.
I've got some recommendations here. How heavily are you involved, or were you involved in the audio version of Firekeeper's Daughter?
So usually debut authors really don't get a say in it. And one time I did a lot of research. So my book involves, there's a sexual assault that happens. Well, I looked at a number of books that were written in a certain time period and how they addressed sexual assault. Seeing, like, where is the line in publishing, in young adult publishing, like what, you know, how are sensitive topics handled? And I read this story, or I listened to this story, and it was about this girl who, her father's friend tries to have an improper relationship with her, or, you know, he fondles her. But the audiobook was narrated by a guy, by an older guy, and the story was written in first person point of view, so this male narrator is like, oh, so-and-so's got a really good butt. And I was just like, what in the world? That author, she probably didn't have any say in who read her book. And it was gross to have this middle-aged man reading this book in the voice of that was supposed to be a young girl. So I was pretty adamant that I wanted an Indigenous narrator to do my story, and my publisher was on board for it, and so we put out this like blast on social media for calling for an Indigenous narrator. You didn't need to have experience, and I was able to listen to all of the 5-minute audio samples, and the instant I heard Isabella Starr LeBlanc. She is a stage actress who lives in Minneapolis. She is Dakota, and the instant I heard her, I thought, that's exactly how Donna sounds in my head. There's kind of a little throatier voice, and she actually, her audition, she read a scene that had Lily and Granny June in it too, and in her Granny June, it was like, she gets it. She sounds like the elders from my community. And so my publisher, they...
That authenticity, I've got this 2-hour commute, so I listen to the book on tape, and that will forever be, those will forever be the voices that I hear with those characters.
Definitely, and then the odd story is that I listened to the first draft of I listened to the finished product of the audio, and we were so worried about Isabella mispronouncing anything in the Ojibwe language that we really focused on that. And then I'm listening, and she mispronounced pasties as pasties, which are completely different. I was like, oh my God. So I called my agent, and I was like, Faye, this has to get changed. This is bad. And, she's like, let me see what I can do. So then she calls me back a half hour later, and she's like, Macmillan wants to make sure that they do right by you. Sorry to say, the CDs are already being produced in China, and there's no way to stop that train. But they can ship the recording equipment back to Isabella in Minneapolis. She can recreate where she was when she was recording the book, and they'll do that. Is it worth it for 5 uses of this word? And I was like, Faye, I can't show my face north of the Mackinac Bridge. Being mispronounced. I was like, my cousins are ruthless. My nickname for the rest of my life will be Pasty. So I do get people, listeners who will let me know, did you know that word was mispronounced? And it's like, yes, I know. That train had already left the station.
Are you folks, please, come to the microphone.
It's a long way to the microphone. In the book, the very first page is not in a chapter and it's not in a division. It stands alone in italics. And I read it, it was well written. I turned the page and it had nothing to do with what had just happened. And as I read the book, I realized I think it appears 6 or 7 more times. The story changes gradually. It's a real teaser. It's very interesting. And I wondered if you could talk about what made you do it. What effect had you seen it used before? I have not seen that usually.
Well, I was always told that not to do a prologue. And then I went to this writers' conference called Quayle, Color of Children's Literature, and an editor named Alvina Ling, she read my first 15 pages, and she was like, your story is kind of a slow start. Tell me more about it. And so I was telling her, the gist of the story. And she was like, have you ever thought about doing a prologue with maybe a more exciting, part of the story? And I was like, yeah, I did, but then I was told, I have read that you don't do prologues. And she goes, that situation is exactly why you should do a prologue. If your story is a slow burn, like a slow start, teasing that reader that there's something coming. And so that's why I did that. And then having that be something that I think that our minds protect us in very stressful situations, and maybe hold back information that's too overwhelming for our conscious minds to comprehend or fathom. So that's why when Donis dreams about it, about that scene, a little more information gets revealed each time. So thank you very much.
We've got time for...
No, really?
So for first of all, I just have to say that I can't believe this is your first book because it is so beautifully written and I'm jealous and I want to be you when I grow up. So my question is, what did the editing process look like for you? And like the whole finding your voice, like how did you just write it? And you said you worked on it for 10 years. So.
Yeah. So when my book was on submission, it had been sent to a number of editors at publishing houses that my editor and that I thought might be a good fit. I had phone calls with 12 editors. Each phone call, I would ask the same questions like, what was your sit up and take notice moment that you were interested in the story? What editorial feedback do you have? How can I make this story stronger? Different things like that. And my agent had said, make sure you take notes because those conversations are going to blur. It all happened over the course of 1 week that I had these 12 phone calls. And there was one editor, Tiffany Liao, at Holt Books for Young Readers, and she scared the heck out of me because she talked so fast I couldn't even get a word down. And her vision, her editorial vision for the story and the scope of revisions that she wanted me to tackle, it was so daunting. And I remember calling my agent right after, and I said, I just had the most incredible conversation with Tiffany Liao, and I said, I'm so scared, but I think she's the one. And then I was just thrilled that Macmillan was the one with the offer that was the best offer, and that I could. Macmillan did their thing, so there were 3 imprints of Macmillan, and they that had editors that wanted to, and so Macmillan only does 1 bid on behalf of Macmillan, and then if they're the winning bid, the author gets to pick which editor they're going to work with. So they're not like imprints bidding against under the same roof. And so I knew that when Macmillan came forward with this phenomenal 7-figure deal that is life-changing, I knew I was getting Tiffany, and so that was incredible. It was like a year. I added 100 pages to the manuscript working with her. I changed the order of some things. One of the best pieces of advice that she had given to me was that I was trying to introduce too many characters in Act 1. And she said, but I was like, but the hockey players, you gotta know who the hockey players are. And she said, Act 1 is to introduce Dawnus and the characters that she cares the most about, primary characters. And she said, all these secondary characters are going to be so much more memorable as suspects. Save them for Act 2. And I was like, aha, this is why I go from 26th chapter, Act 1 down to 13. And so, yeah, she was able to get it, and it made sense.
Can I just ask, was there any point where you were like editing and you're like, I don't even like this anymore? Or different parts?
No. It was anything that she wanted me to consider. It was like asking questions about things, and I would either push back or I would explain why I had it in the story.
So have a good editor.
So that relationship, that editor relationship was everything. This book would not be what it is without her as the editor.
Thank you.
Folks, we're going to wrap the conversation here, but the night is not over. There are refreshments back in the state dining room. Angeline will be there to sign books. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer some questions one-on-one as well. But I want to thank all of you for being here, and I especially want to thank Angeline Boulley. Thank you.